this for me is a an interesting thing, and you would have thought, as we're sort of 2 years into a pandemic, I'd be used to speaking to everyone via Zoom. So I think probably the easiest thing is I will just talk to the empty room that I'm sat in at the museum, and if I run into problems or you can't hear me, or and Jack will give me a good poke, and I will hopefully slow down or stop. I have a habit of speaking too quickly, and I also have a habit of putting far too much into a lecture. So that will be interesting. I'm going to crack on. I hope we're all met, and I hope everyone's well, safe and happy. My name is Peter Reavill. I'm the Finds Liaison Officer for Shropshire and Herefordshire, and I work for the British Museum's Portable and Antiquities scheme, employed by Birmingham Museums Trust. And here is a lovely slide of the topic that we're going to be talking about mostly is the Shropshire Sun Pendant, or a gold Bulla, discovered in Shropshire several years ago. These are also the very fine people who employ me, so I have to show their logos in whatever I do. Anyway, hopefully by clicking this, you will see that my thought is that this is Britain's finest Bronze Age treasure. There are many that will disagree with me, and I'm just pulling your leg really, but it is maybe one of the most important pieces of gold metalwork to have turned up in Western Britain in the last 100 years, if not within Britain. And hopefully by the end of this evening's lecture, you will be in a position to either agree or disagree with me. So let me continue. This evening's talk is going to be broken down into a number of themes. Those are going to be around the discovery of the Bulla, how and what it means within the landscape. And for me, this is more important maybe than the object itself. It's how it sits within Shropshire's archaeology, within the West Midlands and the Welsh Marches archaeology, but also what this then actually physically means for our understanding of the period, and how does one find take us forward. I'll also look at what's happening at the moment, so the museum acquisition of it and the finds process, in the treasure process, the importance of landscape in prehistory, and as well as looking at sort of some of the first results we've got from some excavation funded by the British Museum. Following that, we're going to look at what the potential is for future discoveries, and the recent exhibition at Shrewsbury Museum called A Gathering Light, which was an exhibition and film displayed the first time that the Bulla has ever been put on display. And finally, I'll look a little bit about the future of Shropshire Museum's partnership with the British Museum to develop a prehistoric gallery for the county, and also your opportunity to see the Bulla and also the amazing other discoveries that are being put on display at the British Museums in an exhibition which opens next week. So, a find always starts with a person, and that person is the person who found it. And in this case, we have a metal detectorist, a gentleman called Bob Greenaway, who I've had the pleasure of knowing since 2003, when I started with the Portable Antiquities scheme in Shropshire. He was one of my first finders. He's one of my most regular finders. And he's also, as you'll see, one of my luckiest finders. But before I started, he was reporting his finds to the museum service, probably for at least a decade before then, to the curator. So before the Portable Antiquities scheme started in the area, when sort of reporting archaeological finds was something which didn't happen as a matter of course, and how things have changed in the last 25 years across Britain's sort of landscape of our portable past is immeasurable, as in we are so privileged to see so much material. Unfortunately, we're also so privileged to lose so much material, and this is a story of how the museum service have worked with Bob to ensure that we can collect as many of the objects from this landscape as we possibly can. But it's that moment of discovery. That's the moment of discovery as an archaeologist that I always find sort of both humbling, but also being sort of the second or the third person to hold something which has been in the ground for thousands of years is a reason why I do this job. And as you can see, Bob's thought was, I held it in my hand and looked at it and thought it's perfect. And I can't actually find a better description of an object than that, as in to think this object has sat in the ground for 3,000 years and has come to light, and with a gentle wash has suddenly sort of, the life has been sort of breathing. I don't mean breathing. The life has come back into it. So what is this thing? Why is it that I'm going to sort of spend the next hour talking to you and discussing this wonderful golden pendant? Well, it's an object from our past. It's an object from towards the end of the Bronze Age, so the late Bronze Age, and it's an object which is around 3,000 years old. It's functional. It's suspended by a tube, and we think it was probably worn around the neck, but do we know for sure? No, we don't. The fact that it is decorated on every conceivable surface with intricate, beautiful, fine lines is amazing. The fact that you've got several of these solar patterns, designs on it, and holding the object, which I've had the privilege to do and to study it, you know that the light captures it in different sort of different directions, and it becomes its own, it has its own personality. For something which is been sort of in the ground in Shropshire for that amount of time, to be sort of, for me to say it has an identity is maybe very strange, but for me it is a person or an entity in its own right, without trying to be sort of all mumbo jumbo ritual about it. So it's a pendant and it's hollow. And one of the reasons we know it is hollow is that at the British Museum, they have run it through their MRI scanner. And that scanner basically cuts through it so you can see inside it. What does it tell us is inside? Well, it doesn't tell us a huge amount, if I'm honest, as in it tells us that it isn't hollow, as in there isn't an airspace inside, but we haven't been able to sample the material in it. We assume that the internal area of it is probably filled with either an organic a clay or maybe a sort of a rich clay sand, but that work hasn't really been done to do the intricate analysis on the inside of it. What we can say is that it is beautifully adorned, as in it has been made by a craftsperson who is at the height of their skills, and it's a skill which is almost unparalleled across Western Britain when it comes to gold work, or it's equal to the very finest pieces of gold work we know of. Gold work of this nature is very, very sort of delicate, as in we're dealing with sheets which are relatively thin. We're talking about a gold sheet which is maybe no thicker than maybe 2 or 3 millimeters in any one place. And as you can see, the design on one side is a solar pattern. So we've got a series of interlocking triangles banded by sort of arcs of panel work. If we look at the opposite side, you can see the same theme runs through that. We've got the same triangles, but we've also got rectangular panels and sort of herringbone patterns running through it. To give you an idea of the form, this is a 3D scan, a low-res 3D scan of the object, and the pendant itself is keel-shaped, as in If you think of a Terry's chocolate orange and you break a segment out of a Terry's chocolate orange, that is basically the shape of the pendant that you've got. And you've got these two hollow, the idea that there's a tube which runs around them. That's actually a false tube. It's been formed by two on either side. So at either edge, you have rolled gold elements which have been sort of soldered onto it, soldered in such a way that the join is almost impossible to see. And it gives it the impression that it's actually a separate solid tube which runs along it. But actually, it's a tongue-shaped piece of gold which has been well sort of folded in such a way that then allows the base to be soldered onto it to form that keel shape. The decoration must have been applied after it had been constructed. So if you're taking gold, which is very thin, forming it, and very thin and very soft, forming it into a shape around an organic or a clay body, soldering on the elements and then decorating it, you're looking at a piece of workmanship which is of the top most sort of echelons that you could imagine. This application of design, how has that been put on there? Well, in a way it's been cut into the surface, but I see it more as the gold has been moved by the craftsmen into the areas that they want it to be. So although that surface has been, as in looks to have been cut with a tool, actually think of it more like a plough pushing through it, and the tool they would have used for that is probably an awl. Now, whether that's a bronze awl like the one you can see here in the corner, that's possibly unlikely. It may well be a very fine tine from an antler, which has been whittled down to make a very sort of solid point. It may be a fire hardened tool. The nature of the gold suggests it has a very fine tip to it, and that very fine tip is angled to create the pattern. And to give you an idea of the intricacies of that gold work, I've taken a 1mm square and dropped it into the decoration. Sorry, I'm taking a sip of tea while I'm talking. So you can see this 1mm square, and I've dropped that into the main panel of decoration. And you can see each one of those lines is a fraction of a millimetre. In fact, you're getting probably 4 lines per millimetre, which for gold work of that age is remarkable. And then when you round that up across the whole of the design, you start to appreciate just the level of skill. If we looked at the base, so the bottom of the keel is also decorated, we're looking at maybe 7 lines per millimetre square. That is absolutely remarkable, as in craftsmen today would struggle to apply lines like that without magnification. And you've got to remember at the time, there's very limited, if not no magnification whatsoever. And the other thing is, look at how the lines, as I would say to my children, the craftsman is colouring in his borders, as in he's applying it and he's not going over his edge. So we've got the lines have been applied with amazing technical ability, with an amazingly steady hand, and that steady hand has proven that it's sort of, yeah, one of the best craftsmen in the world. One of the things we can do with this is, because we can trace the decoration through, and by where the overlaps happen, if we know what came first and what then followed it, just because we can look in detail at where these things are. The one element I was going to pick out here actually is, you've got a beautifully designed object with an amazing geometric pattern to it. But there's one area just here, there's one triangle which is different to everything else. So you can see that the lines are going in one direction and then the following a direction. But this one here, that line just doesn't follow, and it stands out as an aberration within the design. I can only believe that a craftsman wouldn't notice that. It's not a mistake. It's not like they've had a dodgy Friday afternoon and gone, oh, do you know what? Let's knock off earlier and nip down to the burnt mound and have a beer. It's actually that this is a deliberate act, a deliberate choice that's been made. Now, whether that's a choice which is there's a reason behind it, or whether this is a choice which is part of the cultural design, as in there are people who are far, far cleverer than I am and who have so much more expertise with gold, and I would be looking to people like Professor Mary Cahill, who's amazing when it comes to the metalwork of this period, to try and unpick some of the reasoning behind this decoration, or again, Neil Wilkins, who's the curator of the British Museum. I am only on the upland slopes when it comes to talking about metalwork of this period. There are people out there who know far more than I do. So we've got this object with a deliberate choice to do something different against the design. The only place I can think of parallels to that are in Islamic art, and in where to have an object which is perfect is in the front. And maybe that's the sort of thing we might be considering with this, as in to create a divine object which has which is perfect, might actually be a cultural taboo that we just don't know about. Again, I'm trying to claw ideas back 3,000 years, and we will never know, but that doesn't stop me trying to have fun with some of this. So what can we do with some of this patterning? You'll see here a rather amateurish way of the order that I think things happen. So for example, they put on the outer ring and then the inner ring, and then they fill the detail in between it. The reason for that is that those lines are the inner lines overlap the outer ones, so therefore the outer ones must be earlier within that design choice. How do we know that? How do we know how they created that pattern? Well, it's geometric. It isn't perfect, but it is geometric, and it must have been put on with compasses, or a pair of compasses to at least get the spacing and the order and the evenness right across it. That spacing could have been put on very, very likely with pinholes, which, as in pin marks, which we can't see, or maybe just drawn on and then removed as part of the decorating process. As I've said, these are the lines that we're looking for, the overlaps, the slight mistakes and wobbles, but we're talking about fractions of millimeter designed things. So I'm not being critical, I'm just saying this is how we can unpick it. I'm hoping. Sorry, my slides seem to have stopped. So this is the pattern that I think, or the order that I think the design has been added in this area. Now, the issue is we don't know how that internal logic is, and we can't say we have a craftsperson who's left-handed or right-handed, or we've not seen the work of one person but many people. What we can say is that there is an order there, and it seems that certain elements come before the others, which sort of makes sense, but it's probably as far as I can go, and hopefully when we do the future analysis of it and the big publication, which will come out about not just the find but the site, we will explore that in much more detail and with much more technical ability than I've just bodged together using paint on my laptop. So we have a beautiful object, but it isn't the first beautiful object that we know about. I've been using the word, well, the British Museum used the word Sun Pendant, but it is a form of Bulla. The word Bulla comes from the Latin, which is for bubble, and was thought to be, as in these things were thought to be Roman, because prehistoric peoples wouldn't have the capacity to make such beautiful things. And of course, the Romans were civilized, and therefore they are. That's a very Victorian way of looking at it. And as our understanding has increased, we've been able to pick up a variety of objects with similar designs and patterns. The vast majority of Bulla are known from Ireland. They are a phenomena there. And the two British examples, which I'm illustrating here, the Shropshire example and the one from the River Irwell, are objects which are very, very similar. They are maybe brother and sister, or kissing cousins, as it were, so that we've got designs which influence one another. Unfortunately, the Irwell Bulla has been lost. It was found in a canal works on the River Irwell in the late 18th century. And the River Irwell is Manchester. So actually, we're looking at a place which isn't very far away from Shropshire, and an environment, a depositional environment, which is very similar. We're not quite sure exactly when it was found, because different antiquarian sources of the 18th century tell us different things. But we do know that it was sold in the early 19th century to somebody called Carruthers, and then it just disappears from sight. And we don't know what happened to it, or where it went. But we do have this absolutely beautiful line drawing, which allows us to at least start to pull these things together. And Mary Cahill has been saying that these objects, she's written a brilliant article on them, and is on the lookout for this. And it was suggested when it turned up originally that this might be the missing one, but it isn't. It's another one, which gives us the opportunity to say, if there are two, does that mean there are three? And we are yet to find a third one. That would be unbelievably amazing. But I've been talking about gold shiny things a lot, and although the Bulla is important, the landscape and the other objects are equally. So the Bulla is known as the Shropshire Marches Sun Pendant, or the Shropshire Sun Pendant. We have a number of other caches of prehistoric metalwork, or hoards, from this period. Here we have the Shropshire Marches 2 hoard, dated in a similar way. This is a piece of lead which has been folded around two absolutely beautiful golden lock rings, hair rings, which are very finely decorated. You can see there the detail on them. Lock rings are really rare in this part of the world. There are a handful known from Wales. There are many more known from southern Britain. There are many known from Ireland, but this is the first pair from Shropshire. And the fact that they've been deliberately mashed in this lump of lead is really significant. I say mashed in this lump of lead as if lead is unimportant. In the Bronze Age, lead as a source is amazingly important. It goes into the metalwork, all of the bronze axes have an element of lead in it to help the alloy fill the casting molds. When we actually come to pieces of lead from the Bronze Age, this is much rarer than the lock rings it contains. This piece of lead is phenomenally important. It's the first lead ingot we think we have from a depositional environment outside a mining context, which is, again, very, very unusual, but also hugely, hugely exciting. We've got other objects. So this is a third hoard of metalwork, this time a mixture of bronze axes, a spear, an iron axe, and an older object, which is probably at least 300 or 400 years older than everything else there. The axes are fairly standard for what we see in this part of the world. We've got looped and socketed axes of the South Wales type, which are a predominant feature of hoards in Shropshire and Herefordshire, as well as sort of up the Offa's Dyke, Powys border of Radnorshire and Montgomeryshire. We also have a Brython type socketed axe, which was, as in Chris Musson's excavation showed, examples being found within a metalworking context in the Brython Hill Fort over the border in Montgomeryshire. We have what looks like a complete spearhead broken into two parts, but it's actually two different objects which just look as if they go together. Is that deliberate? Possibly. Is that happenstance? Maybe. The deliberate breaking of objects and creation of objects is a hot topic, and again there's a work which has been just published by Matt Knight, which is really exciting, looking at how objects are broken and destroyed and deposited and what their meanings might be. You also have this older sort of probably 300-400 years older knife blade or probably dirk handle with the mushroom headed rivets, which would have held an organic handle to the top of the blade. And then you have this lump of iron. This is a socketed iron axe, which is in a Bronze Age hoard. That shouldn't happen if we were following our normal chronology, as in there is a period in the early Bronze Age called the Cleanvour, and that period is where everything changes. Everything moves from being bronze to iron, but that transition is a slow process. So the fact that we have a closely associated iron axe to a Bronze Age hoard in the same environment as we have a really important piece of lead with gold lock rings and the pendant sort of elevates this site. I've been quite tongue-in-cheek because the Industrial Revolution starts in Shropshire with Ironbridge and that in the 18th century. This is the Iron Age, and this is where the industry really starts to happen, and iron is started to use, and we've got evidence for that in Shropshire. That is really important to our county's story and to this region's story. There are around 20 of these iron socketed axes known across Britain, and they're made in such a way that the smith who's making them understands bronze axes and how they're made, but he doesn't understand, or they don't understand, the iron and how the iron is forged. And so they've made an axe in the way they would in the Bronze Age, but it doesn't. It works, but it's very clunky and it's very unrefined, and it's just at the beginning of people who've started to understand this new metal type. So if 3 hoards weren't enough, we've got 4 hoards. Here is a very small, maybe more personal hoard of 2 axes, a broken gouge and a broken socketed knife. This is the sort of thing that Shropshire tends to see quite a lot of. Little deposits put together and put in the ground. They're not hoards which have been put in because they're scrap metal. They're perfect objects which have had a life history, and then for one reason or other they're put to the ground in a ceremony, or at least some sort of process. We've got 5 hoards. This is another Bronze Age hoard, different in composition. Here we have objects which are much more interesting from the point of view of, we've got weaponry, we've got socketed spearheads, we've got socketed knives, an axe, and we've also got woodworking tools and metalworking waste. The thing on the bottom is a casting jet. I'll come on to that in a second, I think. So we've got socketed spearheads, very small, quite unusual examples, as in they're not well represented in other assemblages. They're quite rare. But Shropshire is a place of spears, as in our hoards. Places like Willamore and Broadwood are full of spears, hundreds of spears going into wetlands. We've also got these tools, so a socketed gouge for metalworking. We've got some form of socketed knife, a Thornton style socketed knife, small socketed axes used for woodworking rather than as in small carpentry woodworking rather than chopping down trees. And we've got metalworking waste. We've got casting jets, the thing with the which looks a bit like a flying saucer, or the two with two prongs, the bifurcated projections on the bottom. Those are from the top of a mould casting. We've also got a vessel of some sort and a small ingot. The sixth hoard, again from the same landscape, has similar objects within it. But again, there's a subtle variety within it. We have an object which in itself is a hoard. We have an object which has an element with two elements applied to it. So we've got something pushed down the socket of an axe, pinning in place another bronze object, whether that's a razor or a pendant, we're not quite sure. We've got quite unusual socketed axes which are in poorer condition. I think the condition is to do with the soil they're in. The soil isn't as peaty, isn't as rich in organic material. Again, we're seeing objects which are old going into them. So the spearhead in this example is 300 or 400 years older than everything else. We've got another gouge. We've got a little anvil for metalworking on. We've got a tanged chisel. And then we've got personal objects. We've got a razor for shaving or for some form of use, whether that is butchery or whether that is personal grooming is anyone's guess. And then we have an absolutely massive cauldron handle. That cauldron handle is one of two or possibly three on a large cauldron which would have sat above a fire, that you maybe take a gallon, maybe 2 gallons of liquid, and you'll be able to brew with, or you'd be able to make a stew for a community in. It's got wear on it. You can see that it's misshapen. That's misshapen through use, where it's been suspended by chains from the roof of a hut, like a roundhouse. Without one of these handles on it, the cauldron is useless. You can't suspend it. You can't use it above a fire. And if that's the case, putting something like that, not just it disables the object that it's been taken from. So are they collecting elements to do with their lives and putting those in the ground? We also have a leaf-shaped spear, a leaf-shaped sword of the Ewart Park phase. This was found in the 70s by a ploughman very close to where the hoard was discovered, and recorded in the Historic Environment record, the Sites and Monuments record in Shropshire. And Shropshire is amazingly lucky to have not only a fantastic SMR, HER now, but also to have the input of a lady called Lily Chitty, who's an antiquarian, probably one of the last modern antiquarians, since she passed away in the 80s. But she published things from the 1920s onwards, and was a walking encyclopedia of Western Britain's archaeology, working with Cyril Fox and people like that. But all of her notes are in Shropshire Archives. All of her records form the heart of the Sites and Monuments record in the county. If that wasn't good enough, we've got 2 more hoards which are going to inquest very, very soon. This one is the 7th hoard, with an awl that you saw at the beginning that I put up against the gold, the Bulla, but this has a winged chape. Again, very late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, amazingly rare within Western Britain contexts. We've got spears, but the spears themselves have been augmented. They've been decorated with additional lines, decoration, drilled holes. They're either very, very worn or beautifully perfect. And you can see from the patina on them that the patina includes areas of reed and waterlogged things. So where they've sat in the ground, they've laid against organic deposits which have formed part of their surface over the years. these are the areas that you can see the decoration on, especially on the lower one, where you've got little linear decoration around the socket, as well as lines around the upper blade. We also have very strange objects. We think this is probably a chape, but we can't find a special parallels for these really at all. And it's very, very fine casting. So maybe it isn't a chape, but we've called it a funnel-shaped object, but the exact function we're not sure of. The 8th hoard, though, moves well and truly out of the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, and into the later Iron Age, so the last century BC into the very beginning of the 1st century AD. And this is so important, as in we've got a site which is producing metalwork not just for 400 or 500 years in the Bronze Age, 3,000 years ago, but we've also got a continuity, that this metalwork shows us continuity into the late Iron Age. And here you've got a number of harness pieces, a turret ring off of a chariot, and the socketed ring on the left-hand side of your screen is unparalleled against any other piece of Iron Age metalwork. The form itself is completely unknown in that socket, and we assume it must be a specific object which has been cast for a specific purpose on a chariot. We also have linchpins. Now the linchpins are the pins which stop the wheel on your cart falling off. They're the thing which holds it to the axle, and so we've got these absolutely stunning red glass inlaid linchpins. We also have personal objects, so we have pins, brooches, and many rings. Rings are used for all sorts of purposes. We have toggles for clothes fastening or maybe harness fastening, but we also have a small latane style knife socket there as well. The other thing is that the toggle on the right hand side would have had red coral inlays on it, but those have been dissolved by the metalwork, by the acidity of the ground. But this place remains sacred, and it remains sacred throughout the beginning of the Roman period. And everybody thinks when the Romans arrive, everyone gives up their old ways, but this is completely untrue. This is a cache of material which is dated by the Domitian coin to the very end of the 1st century, alongside a Polden Hill brooch, as well as these funny terminals which we think are probably from a staff, and a segmented bracelet of late Iron Age date. This forms a distinct little cache placed in the ground in the same landscape as the Bulla, but we are looking at an object which, as in at this point, was 1,000 years ago. This landscape has stayed sacred for 1,000 years. It is like saying now that well, as in it's the same as we look at our parish churches, as in a church is a sacred space which has remained there since the Norman period for the last 1,000 years. This is no different. It's just an open air ritual landscape that means so much to the people of Shropshire at the time. But we've got other objects, single objects, which aren't classed, well, some of them will be classed as treasure, but in my mind, single objects have the same importance as a hoard. It's a representative sample of, as in it's a representative action to put these aren't just somebody wandering by and an object falling off the back of their cart into the bog. Oh, we can't get it. That must happen. But when you get conglomerations like this, I see a wider, more important question going on. So we have this rolled gold bracelet. We have one of the largest socketed knives I've ever seen. It's absolutely phenomenal, the length of it. And we have other sort of socketed knives and the sword I showed you earlier. We have single axes being put in there, but these axes have been mutilated. Somebody's taken another axe and given this one a damn good whack, or not just one whack, but many whacks. And that's why you've got all of that dinting and denting on the surface of the axe itself. Now, those are striations which have been deliberately put there by somebody whacking something else with a sharp edge onto it. We also see other single finds. So we see spears, socketed axes, and we've also have a very late early Bronze Age, so around 1800 BC, flat axe. That's the oldest piece of metalwork we have from this site. And if we take that as maybe a foundation deposit, or a deposit of a very old object which has stayed within society for 400 or 500 years as a sacred object or a special object being put in the ground at this time. We have other odd things going on. I've shown you the lead ingot, which has been sort of folded around the piece of gold. We also have two other socketed pieces of lead, which look like the sockets of axes, so that it looks as if they've cast a lead axe or a fragment of a lead axe. And there's a hoard similar material from Llangollen over the border, which is in the National Museum of Wales. Again, these objects look very, very scrappy, but they are so rare and they give us such a unique insight that they are important objects in their own right. These are some of the other Iron Age finds from the same area. Other objects which have been found on their own within the same 2 kilometers of the Bulla find spot. This is such a dense, rich object that it asks many, many questions of why this material is there. And just giving you a quick timeline of how this all fits, we have a peak of deposition in the late Bronze Age and the very early Iron Age, and then a second smaller peak in the late Iron Age, early Roman period. But this is a period of at least 1800 years, if not 2000 years of deliberate sort of communal sharing of this space for a very specific task. So, is this a one-off in Shropshire? Well, I've been working in Shropshire since 2003. Yes, it is, as in the density of material here is unheard of. But Northeast Wales is amazingly important in the Bronze Age. And the area of the Dee, the Severn, and the Arm is amazingly important as an area which is producing really important objects. So you have things like the Burden Hoard, which is in Wrexham Museum, a socketed axe, a faceted axe with gold ingots and a blade which has been deliberately broken and bent. You have the Rosset Hoard with this absolutely beautiful belt made up of gold wires, alongside a series of pull staves and gold objects. You have other material which is further around the coast from the Great Orme. I've put this in because you have these two beautiful lock rings, very similar to the ones in the second parcel that I was talking about. Not as beautifully decorated as the Shropshire examples I will give you, but it shows that this material turns up. And the Orme is an amazingly important place. The Orme is a landscape that produced, as it's where the vast majority of copper comes from in this period. It's an absolute key place. You also have other things going on. So you have the Mould Cape coming from a burial monument. You have the Caergurley bowl, which comes out of a peat bog. Again, beautifully decorated shale bowl inlaid with gold. Stunning objects. But these objects are all coming from northeast Wales. And if we forget for a moment the border between England and Wales and talk about landscapes, they're coming from the same landscape. The South Cheshire, North Shropshire, Northeast Wales, Wrexham, Montgomeryshire area is one unified land unit, of which you can typify in a very, very easy way. And unfortunately, our modern boundaries get in the way, and we end up talking about England, Wales, Cheshire, Shropshire, Wrexham, and actually that means very little when you go back in the past. So why is this material where it is? Sorry, that was me having another sip of very cold coffee. We've got a very deep ditch, a ditched river running through this site into an upland bog. And you can see it's Pancake Flat as a landscape. The reason it's Pancake Flat is it's full of peat. It's a wetland which is being drained, and this landscape is the landscape we know of across the whole of northern Shropshire. The Wealden Moors over towards Newport, the South Cheshire area has very similar. For me, I call these merescapes. These are areas which are sort of dominated by water and the edges of water. And that shows you that it isn't Pancake Flat, that there are subtleties in the landscape that you can't really see. But when you zoom out on LiDAR, you can see these small islands, these liminal areas within this wetland. And this is key for where we're looking at today. We're looking at a wetland landscape, which is an area which is in flux. It moves, it changes. When it rains, when it rains, the water comes up, it moves, and the edges of where these objects are going are really, really important. This isn't the river, by the way. This is the river at the bottom of the Team, which is at the bottom of my garden when it was in flood. But it gives you an idea of how these areas change, how these as in what is grass and you can cross, turns very, very easy and very swiftly into river and then goes back again. These little islands which poke themselves up in amongst river and wetlands. I have taken out very deliberately a slide which I have used in the past because this talk is going to have an afterlife on the internet, and that shows the find spot distribution. With Ben Geary coming over and co-leading it. That excavation dug down and tried to identify ecofacts, so objects which are wood or bone, areas that we can date with radiocarbon dating, and also just to understand the nature of the landscape and how much peat is in that area. You can see by the very black soil how rich an area that is, but it is a mixture of peat deposits, peat lenses, and soil, suggesting that you've got areas which is right on the edge, producing this change over time. You can see with this that there are a series of fire-cracked stones as well as pieces of worked wood at the bottom of one of these test pits, suggesting a preserved late Bronze Age landscape in place. And we're waiting for radiocarbon dates of these. But what is found here mirrors many of the wetland sites in North Shropshire, in that the thing which makes this stand out is that it has metalwork with it. The other sites which we know of have dugout canoes, plank built vessels, things like that. So why is this material turning up now? For me, there's only one reason, and that's climate change. Shropshire is experiencing a period of rapid wetland degeneration, and that wetland degeneration is caused by taking too much water out of bogs. It's caused by over agriculture, so agricultural use of them. That we've got soil erosion. We've also got metal detector erosion. So we've got better metal detectors which go deeper and allow people to find things at a greater depth than they once would. But one of the reasons for that is that the soil where objects might have been buried maybe 18 inches deep, they're now only buried 9 inches deep because we've lost 9 inches. And if you drive around North Shropshire on the wetland roads, it's like, in places it's like driving over corrugated iron, because the contraction of the peat just creates ripples in the road. And that is something we need to learn to live with. It's a consequence of man-made climate change. And in a way, we are now looking at an environment in many ways that is returning to the pressures that were seen in the late Bronze Age, where agricultural practices created local climate change and the creation of peat bogs and things like that. We're seeing this across the whole county. And one of the ways we're noticing it, or I'm noticing it most, is in the recovery, or the significant recovery of significant amounts of prehistoric metalwork. This is a process that has been speeding up. And last year I saw, the year before COVID, so 2019, we saw 3 Bronze Age hoards being recovered. In the time before that, I'd seen 3 Bronze Age hoards recovered in 5 years. This year alone, I have 3 Bronze Age hoards being reported through the Treasure Act. So that's sort of since autumn, we've had 3 new hoards being reported. The reason for that is that our environment is changing, and we need our farmers to be supported in a way that allows them to work their land, but also protect our heritage. Rant over. I'm moving on to now a nice thing, which is the museum. The pendant was acquired by the British Museum, and as part of the agreement, when they acquired it, it would be to put on display for the very first time in Shropshire, and that happened in September. And as part of the process, we commissioned a local artist, an animator called Sam Moore, Dr. Sam Moore, who's in Manchester, and she created a short film called Treasure. And in that Treasure, in that film, she was trying to capture the essence of discovery, the essence of how people were in the past. And I hope that film captured the sort of some of the ambiguity over how these objects get into the ground originally. So what they actually mean to communities and what those communities looked like in the past, because we have this very static view of people in the past being very like us, and they were absolutely as in EastEnders in the Bronze Age would be fascinating. But I think what we're looking at is often people oversimplify the past and think, well, it was simpler times with simpler people. That's absolute rubbish. Their lives were as complex as our lives are, and maybe more so. And the unwritten rules, which were verbally handed down generation to generation, we have lost. So this film tried to capture some of that and evoke a feeling of well, I hope, a feeling around what could potentially be. And as part of that, Hartwick Fisher, the director of the British Museum, came to Shropshire and signed an agreement with the council and the portfolio holder, saying they are going to work together to create a gallery, a prehistory gallery at Shrewsbury Museum and Art Gallery, to display some of the amazing objects that have been discovered very recently, but also to invest in the amazing objects that they've curated for many years. I walk around the Prehistory Gallery in Shrewsbury, which is free to enter, and everyone should go and see it if you're able to, with awe. There are some amazing things there, and it isn't just a small provincial museums collection. It is it will be an amazing, important gallery, hopefully to be opened in 2024, which is only 2 years away now. And as I say, it's very apt that I'm speaking to you today, because next week at the British Museum, a new exhibition, The World of Stonehenge, opens. And again, if you can get to London, if you're going to London for one reason or another, please go and see this exhibition. It will have some of the most important pieces of prehistoric metalwork across northern or northwest Europe displayed there. You'll have seen the chalk drums, which were in the news from Yorkshire earlier. Well, today I saw them. They will be in that exhibition. You've got the sky disc, the Nebra sky disc, which is there the first time it's been out of Germany. You also have the Shropshire Sun Pendant, and on their advertising of it, it is front and centre. This is an object which is leading the charge and representing our part of the world, representing Shropshire and Western Britain as part of the story of that exhibition. Anyway, you've been very kind. I hope I haven't been speaking to a room to myself, and I hope you've all enjoyed me sort of rabbling on for the last sort of 45-50 minutes or so. I'm very welcome to take any questions or have a chat with anybody. So I'll pass back over to Jack